Hello, I'm Brett Knowles. This is a draft presentation of how we might present the 5 best practices in Agile planning. I'd like feedback on the overall content and flow and recognize that we may need to add in better segues between the 5 Agile approaches and Anaplan. So first, we'll start off with a definition of what is Agile planning. And we'll do this briefly, but it's necessary to describe how it involves a broader group. It's about being adaptive and continuous improvement and so forth. But we need to go into the concepts. And so conceptually, it looks a bit like this. Traditional planning, we do strategic planning, and then based on that, we punt over to market and account planning, and then we punt over demand and supply planning, and then we go into production supply planning and so forth. The idea is we do stuff an inch wide and a mile deep, and we sort of do it in a sequential format. Now, Agile planning is different. In Agile planning, we're effectively going to take this and stand it on its edge. We're still going to do it in a linear fashion, but instead of doing it an inch wide and a mile deep, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to slice this up and do small slices all the way through. And what this allows us to do is to get better visibility of how each of the parts work together before we go to the next level of commitment. So what's it look like in comparison? If we do a couple of quick graphs, we compare traditional planning, which we'll use the red line, and Agile planning in green. If we take a look at, for example, the ability to change the plan over time, with traditional planning, you have a whole bunch of flexibility at the beginning, but as the plan begins to create mass, you have less and less flexibility. With Agile planning, it remains basically the same. That means if an event occurs towards the end of your planning period, you can seamlessly include it. What if we take a look at visibility of the plan? In a traditional planning process, it sort of submarines. Once you've launched the strategy part of it, it goes in the organizations, and as it works out the repercussions, it kind of disappears. And you don't see it again until the end. Whereas with Agile planning, it's visible at almost every milestone. Literally, you can have daily or weekly check-ins that keep the plan visible and able to be adapted moment to moment. Let's take a look at the business value, again, across time. A traditional business planning process doesn't add value until it reaches critical mass of completion. Whereas in the Agile planning, it quickly adds value and actually hits diminishing value once you've gone through 3 or 4 iterations and now there's less reverberation. So it adds value much more quickly. If we take a look at risk, traditionally, the risk is high at the beginning and then gradually decreases over time. And again, it's not till you reach critical mass that you have a significant difference. Whereas in Agile planning, the risk diminishes very quickly across time. So it's interesting, if we combine these two charts, what we see is value gets built quickly and risk gets decreased very quickly. Obviously, the ideal world. So that's what Agile planning delivers for you. What are the benefits? Well, our research indicates that you'll have about a 61% lower cost to put the plan together. You'll have about 93% less errors in the plan. You'll have about 39% less staff consumed in building the plan, and that's net going to increase the speed of producing the plan by about 24%. Now, of course, these numbers vary from organization to organization, but the benefits are significant. So what are the 5 best practices you can begin doing right now to move you towards Agile? Thing 1, get rid of all those spreadsheets. Thing 2, simplify your overall planning model. Thing 3, eliminate the idle time within your planning process. Thing 4, deal with that sales planning issue and get better accuracy. And then finally, link strategy to the planning process. Let's take a look at each one of those, obviously starting off with eliminate spreadsheets. We're all familiar with spreadsheets. You've got 4 common evils. One is the broken telephone. You put a number into the black box and something completely different comes out the other end. But because it's a black box, you have no idea what happened. Or in some cases, you just don't know what the source is. We have the final number, but without knowing the source, we can't trust it. In many cases, we have an incorrect formula. Even simple mathematics give us the wrong number. And then we have sort of a loss of fidelity or dimensionality. So maybe the data is collected, sales by region, also by rep, by product, by period, but it goes in the black box and the only thing that comes out is sales by rep. Then just to be creative, we have a combination of these things. Like the most common combination is we combine problem number 1, broken telephone, with problem number 4, loss of fidelity. What that looks like is you might do a sum of all your sales by rep, and you end up with a certain figure. But if I compare that to the sum of sales by product, which should be equal, you end up with a significantly different number. And this disconnect drives leadership crazy. How crazy? Well, if we take a look at the error rate in planning spreadsheets done by a bunch of analysis, we discover that on average, 90% of the spreadsheets have errors in them. And if we take a look at the planning world, 50% of those changes are material, significant problems. What we also know is CFOs and CEOs are frustrated by the time and complexity it takes to resolve those numbers. In fact, 61% of executives tell us that's the most frustrating part of their job. And businesses report that they make poor decisions. In fact, analysis indicates that 33% of the business report that they've made bad decisions because of the spreadsheet. And of those, 1 in 5 have cited direct financial losses as a result of those spreadsheets. Thing 2, let's simplify the planning model. Here's what we know. Our research indicates that based on the number of drivers, the more drivers you add, the higher the error rate is of your plan, the failure rate. And if we take a look at the marginal utility of adding the next driver, for the first couple of drivers is a significant improvement. Then you have this sort of declining, if you take a look at the slope of the curve, a declining benefit. But at a certain point, you actually go over the curve, and each additional driver you add reduces the value in your plan, because now I have drivers conflicting with previous drivers, and we bog the whole system down. So the thing is, budgeting costs too much and takes too much time. Research indicates that on average it takes organizations about 4 months to complete a plan and consumes about 20 to 30% of the senior leadership team and financial managers' time. Huge amounts. The Hackett Group tried to take a look at this and discovered that about 25,000 person hours are used in budgeting per $1 billion in revenue. Or that works out to roughly $1,000 of planning costs per $1 million of revenue. Not a very good equation. What we should be doing is obviously just focusing on this part of the curve down here, where we have the better value, if we could get there. Let's take an example. One of our clients, which is about $35 billion in sales, when we went in, had about 17,500 drivers. Through the work we did in simplification, we ended up with about 27 drivers. And we decided, what's the criteria for success? How do we know these 27 have done a good job? Well, we identified 4 things. Pervasiveness. In other words, how good was the forecast versus the old model? Prediction. Because we have the benefit of taking a look at what actually happened, how accurate was that budget that we created? Third, impact. What is our ability to actually act on the variances that we discover? And then agility. How fast can we react to those observed variances? And as we indexed and scored this, what we found was 82%. The 27 drivers gave us a model that had an 82% index against these compared to the 17,500. But obviously with 27, I could replan using my cell phone. I could do it over a lunch break as opposed to the standard 16 weeks and 25,000 person. That gives us a whole bunch of agility in adapting to change. 3, let's eliminate the idle time. I mean, here's an interesting question. So think of, say, baseball. How much time do you think the ball is actually in play during a game? Answer? Turns out for a 2-hour game, on average, the ball is actually in play only for 6 minutes. A whole bunch of other stuff happens, but it's only in play for 6 minutes. And don't thumb your nose at baseball. What about football? What's your guess there? Guess what? A 3-hour game? 11 minutes of play. So it's almost like, I don't know, think of getting your passport built. Having your passport created probably takes maybe 20 minutes of time, but takes 2 weeks of elapsed time. So that's a very low value-added ratio. So let's go back to, the core topic here, the planning process. Remember what we looked at, the traditional inch-wide, mile-deep process done in sequence? Michael Hammer says, guess what? We have about a 3% value added. In other words, of those 25,000 man-hours it takes per $1 billion, only about 3% of that time is actually helping drive value by building the plan. Huge opportunities if we can simplify. So a bunch of statistics about that. You're more likely to be accurate. You have a more complete budget with fewer iterations. You have more real-time data. The cycle times reduce. The effort level reduces or value added increases, and the reliability increases. Now let's deal with sales planning. And I say that in that tense because sales planning is a problem. The issue is this, that in any organization, sales is a primary driver. Whatever your demand index is, we call it sales. And the idea is if you know your sales, you can accurately predict, the number of people you need. You can accurately predict the number of plant and equipment you need, or assets like inventory and so forth. And you can accurately predict the soft side, engineering support, customer support, that sort of thing. But sales is the most volatile. If we do a control chart on plant and equipment, it's a pretty tight tolerance between upper and lower thresholds. Even with people, we can predict the growth level, and it's fairly predictable, tight tolerance. But if we take a look at sales, the problem is it's very volatile. It's unpredictable, and we need the ability to, with agility, react to it. So what's that look like? Well, it turns out that about only 10% of companies actually make their sales forecast. 90% of companies don't make their forecast. And of those that don't make it, 80% hit less than 40% of their forecast. Now, here's the issue. If I've got a forecast that's missing it by that amount, everything that's downstream is also missing it by that amount. I have the wrong people, the wrong plant and equipment, the wrong support, wrong engineering, everything falls apart. So this isn't an issue of, gosh, I wish we could make the salespeople work harder. Let's assume you're making them work as hard as they can and they're doing the best job they can. The broken part is in the forecast. Whipping your sales guys harder is not going to make a difference. We need the agility to react to it. And what does this mean? Well, it means that if we take a look at the trust level of the plan, what we discover is the trust level is hugely low. In fact, the implications of that is that if it's unsolvable, you have to live with it. But it's immensely solvable. If we take a look at the root causes of those problems, there are things like the delays in getting the data, the lack of accountability within it, the overconfidence or the sandbagging that goes on because we don't react to it, the lack of control over the data, and our inability to understand what that looks like. And so, the idea is these are all solvable if we can put our arms around the sales planning activity. Final thing is about linking strategy to planning. And we act as if they're disconnected, but they're not. If you have a strategy that says, let's penetrate new markets, then our plan better make sure we're doing activities that penetrate new markets. So simply put, the strategy is at the center of everything. Once you understand our strategy, you can now figure out how you should manage the business. You can also figure out what that plan should look like. And based on managing a plan, I can now monitor people's performance and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do, link it to compensation and so forth, and then finally figure out where I can get the best value for improving the overall organization. Now, you haven't seen these 5 hockey pucks before, but you've seen many variations of this, double loop learning, closed loop, strategic planning stuff from, management by objectives, balanced scorecard, lean, Six Sigma, they're everywhere. The idea is it's a universal truth. What we need to do is get those elements. And the ironic thing is, this is not rocket science, and all those building blocks exist. They're kind of like Lego. What if we could sort of build some apps around planning that, an app that tells me about how do I do sales and operations planning, a different app that does supply planning, another one that does consolidation. And like Lego, you can choose which of these blocks you need. You need a bunch of blocks around sales planning, like we talked about. Maybe stuff around better business forecasting. Maybe some building blocks around, human resources and human capital planning. You need a bunch of stuff around how we do project and project management. And of course, that feedback loop. How do we do performance management? How do we do financial management? And how do we do sales performance management? These are the common building blocks that all organizations use, and they're all linked together. If I were to make decisions on sales and operations, it will impact sales forecasting, which will impact revenue modeling, which will impact headcount and so forth. These modules exist. We should be able to join them together and integrate sales with business, with human capital, with everything else, but more importantly, using strategy at the center of this model. So if we change our strategy, we can immediately ripple it through all these other applications. So that's the conclusion of how it is we would tell the story. Looking for feedback. Thanks for your time.